equal standing, according to Rand.
One of the essays that grabbed my attention, just from the title, was called America's Persecuted Minority, Big Business. Now, in the time period that Ayn Rand is writing, there is a lot of talk about minority groups. There's talk about the Blacks, about women's rights. So minority is a term that people have become familiar with. But what Ayn Rand says in this essay is there is a minority group of big business that is actually attacked and vilified in a way that if these kinds of attacks and vilification were occurring with one of the other minority groups, people would stand up and not tolerate it. Here, in this case, because it's businessmen, we tolerate it. This is the group that actually produces what it takes for us to enjoy our standard of living. We rely on them for a lot of things that we just take for granted day to day.
For Rand, that persecuted minority is the Reardon, it's the Dagny Taggart, it's the people who are actually these productive businessmen. Now, there are real-life equivalents of those, and she talks about them in an essay in this book.
That's the notes on the history of American free enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And the history actually is unknown, and therefore that's part of what happens to capitalism's reputation and moral standing, and
mm-hmm.
that's part of what she addresses.
Mm-hmm. And in America's Persecuted Minority, what Rand is telling, what she is sharing with us is her view that the businessmen that we actually rely on, that we count on them to keep producing all of these things that we enjoy, right? Yet we persecute them, we vilify them, we attack them. So she has a very strong defense of that kind of proper businessman, the way she views it. Now, why do people lump together this group of really virtuous people with the kind of people that we associated that slimy side of quote unquote capitalism? So there's another essay in there called The Pull Peddlers. What does she mean by what pull is being peddled, and what does that mean exactly?
I think this refers to the mechanism in a mixed economy. So not a laissez-faire economy, not capitalism, but the kind of society we have today, mm-hmm. where there is some freedom, but large regulation and control, and then subsidies and handouts for business, in which the pull is political favor and the peddling is done by those in Washington who have access to, well, I can give you a subsidy, I can help you with a tax break, I could do this kind of favor for you. And it's a sort of horse trading, and it's seamy, it's ugly, and it's the sort of thing, so in Atlas Shrugged, this occurs, and the archetype practitioners are Orrin Boyle and Jim Taggart,
yes.
Who's in the story Running the Railroad. And this is exactly what happens in a society where the government's power extends beyond its proper function. I think that's
mm-hmm.
the topic we'll touch on, mm-hmm. meaning it's not merely protecting the freedom of individuals to act and produce, it's actually going into the economy and setting controls and regulations and telling businessmen what to do in ways that are inappropriate and wrong and contrary to the protection of freedom. And that creates the ability for government to play favorites and pick winners and losers. And it brings to the surface the worst kinds of businessmen, the Orrin Boyle types, and the ones we see today who deservedly have a bad name. But we shouldn't, as she's saying, assume that all businessmen really have this motivation. There are businessmen who want to produce and excel at it. In fact, we wouldn't be here without them.
Right. And the mixed economy that we have, as you mentioned, what it does is it brings the pull peddlers up to the top because of the nature of the system. So in Atlas Shrugged, even Hank Reardon at one point hires a man in Washington. Because he doesn't want to have to deal with that. But how are you going to work in this system? How are you going to run a business in this system unless you have a man in Washington? So even a Hank Reardon has to actually at one point turn attention to how this gaming system works.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it even pushes the good people to have to deal with a bad system, and it pollutes the whole economy. It's interesting, there's a parallel with We the Living here.
Yes.
Because it's exactly this kind of statist system where on the Soviet model, it's a total system, mm-hmm. and it really does bring out the worst. And it's inherent in having a society where the state has so much power to dispose of people's, not just their wealth and so-called redistribute it in our society, in the mixed economy, but in the Soviet system is essentially dispose of your life.
Right.
And so when that power is put in the hands of government, it brings the ones who want to benefits from the state, and those are the pull peddlers and the pull traders.
Right. So for me, the fact that these two essays are in one collection, I find that to be very interesting. Let's not